I help them from the design concept, coming up with who their customer is, what their brand is supposed to be, and then how to design the clothing they want to do.
Make that idea of yours something that the customer or the client is really going to need and love and then be happy to pay for.
And I think as a sustainable brand, you can never be a cheap brand because it's impossible in the supply chain to get everything cheap.
There is also the issue of businesses not being able to sell out, what they have produced. Being sustainable doesn't mean that one doesn't want to shine. We still want the glit and glamour, but we want it without hurting the planet. So I think that's also part of the reason why some sustainable fashion brands are unable to sell out their clothing. How do you introduce yourself professionally to people who don't have any idea whatsoever about what you do?
Yeah, this is a good one because it's always interesting. If I introduce myself, I usually firstly say I'm a fashion designer because that's concepts that most people can understand and grasp, and they think of something very glamorous usually. And it's not always glamorous, but if I would do the full presentation, I am a fashion designer and a product developer, uh, a, a online educator, and creative business mentor, and predominantly with start-up brands who want to get into the fashion industry and to create sustainable fashion brands.
What if the person you're trying to introduce yourself to doesn't even understand what you mean by product development or a sustainable business? Can you break it down so that they really understand?
Absolutely. So what I do is predominantly I meet with startup brands and we go, so they want to create their own fashion line or their own fashion brand, most likely. So what I do, and through different methods, I do it through online teaching, I do it as a consultant, which means I work hand in hand, we're doing everything from start to end, or I do it as a mentor, which means I give all my knowledge, but they have to do the work themselves. And what I do is I help them from the design concept, coming up with who their customer is, what their brand is supposed to be, and then how to design the clothing they want to do. And I also, because I strongly believe in sustainability, which means helping our world, and not only in fashion, you often think about it as helping by using sustainable fabric. It means we don't destroy the nature, but actually it involves a lot more. It also involves like how the workers in factories work and all the people who are connected within your company and how their social status and environment is. So I try to also include that with all the brands I work with so that they understand what it is and that they get passionate about it like me, so that they include that in their business model. And then I help them come up with the design and think about the end customer and how they would use their designs. And then we draw them. And I do this on a computer most often. I do hand draw sometimes because I enjoy it and it's faster. But then we draw it and then you have to present it in certain documents so that you can send it to a factory and actually get it made. But I also then help the startup to find a factory and help them with the whole process of how you work with the factory, what it is you need from them, and until they have their clothing and they can start to sell it. In a collaboration with the brands, because obviously as a brand, you have different ideas of how this is done and who your customer is, because every customer, and I think that's where sustainability comes in a lot, and it's quite important. Because yes, we can all design something beautiful and come up with lovely things in lovely fabric, but if no one buys it because it's just something that you do because you're passionate about drawing something beautiful, then we're actually not being very sustainable as a business financially, or also like for the world and the environment. So I always try to refer back to who is actually going to use this, and that's the most important part in the sketching and in the coming up with what you're going to sketch, is actually thinking not only creatively but also thinking about like who's going to use it.
Okay, so I really love the part where you talked about creating something that people can actually wear, not just something that you are passionate about. I don't know, but from my observation, I think lots of businesses, even beyond the fashion industry, lots of businesses operate solely based on passion. So they're very passionate about something and then they start creating it. They put all their time, all their resources, all their efforts to create this one thing. But at the end of the day, people don't want to buy it. Some persons can be very honest with you. They'll tell you, oh, it's so beautiful. It's so this, it's so that. But then when it comes to bringing out the money to pay for it, they tell you no. It's fine, it's beautiful, but I can't buy it. I can't pay for it. I don't know, maybe they miss the practical aspect of it, but I really love the fact that you take that into consideration because it is very, very important that businesses, irrespective of whatever industry, it's very important that entrepreneurs and business managers are able to balance passion and financial sustainability when they're building products. It's good to know that I have this idea, but that idea is your idea. You're not the one who's going to use the product at the end of the day, so you have to ensure that you know how to take the needs of the end user into this passion of yours, into this idea that you have, and then make that idea of yours something that the customer or the client is really going to need and love and then be happy to pay for.
I think that in kind of more the creative industry, they often say kill your darling. So if you have designed something that you love, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the best part of your collection, and that the art or the garment or whatever it is the one that's going to sell. You love it, but maybe that's not what your customer loves.
So, in a situation where you are working on a specific collection with one of your clients, and then you can see from the data you have over the years and from the trends that you have observed, you know that this particular collection is really not going to be financially successful in the sense that, I mean, it's beautiful, but people are really not going to want to pay for it that much. So how do you communicate this to the clients without them feeling like, oh, Annette, you don't believe in my goals?
Yeah, it's always a little bit of a tricky one because we all have different personalities, so you have to work differently with different personalities. But I am very honest and I am quite straightforward, and I think it's appreciated in most cases. But I do try and explain it at the end of the day as I did now. Like I asked them, okay, but who is your customer? Have you thought about who your customer is, and try and dig deeper into who actually is the end user? And when you start doing that, if it's not a successful piece or if it's a piece that maybe the end user won't like, that's usually it starts coming up then, because then you can't answer the questions as secure as you would if it is the perfect piece that actually the end user will use. And also, I always recommend. I know when we start a new business or a new product that we kind of, oh, but I don't want to show anyone because someone can steal my idea. I'm the opposite in my approach. I think it's great to talk to other people, go and find a focus group that you can show it to or ask, or even like for new startup fashion brands. I love the idea of pre-selling. If you create your sample and you have one garment, you can go out to the customer straight, or if you're selling to a boutique, and you can ask which ones they want to buy and take your orders before you have even made it. And it's so much more sustainable because you don't produce a lot of dead stock that you can't get rid of. It's slightly tricky because factories aren't 100% used to it yet, but they're getting better and better at understanding the concept. So I think it's about creating the relationship with the factory early on as well, so that you can talk to them about wanting to do this business model, and then do your best to get orders before so you know what they like, and also getting to know your customer.
I feel very hopeful with everything that you have been sharing, because lately we've seen a lot of sustainable businesses in the fashion industry, in the food industry, in different industries. They keep shutting down for the simple fact that it's expensive to run a sustainable business model, you know. So I really love these models that you have just discussed right now. It means that businesses are able to only produce as much, or produce, not like we really can't produce exactly what customers want to buy, but then we can produce as much as people can buy for the business to be profitable. And then at the same time, it also means that you don't have loads and loads of dead stock lying in your business place because people don't want to buy that particular outfit or that particular collection that has been made. So this is really a lot of hope. I That's the way I see it for sustainable fashion brands and even for our planet. Because also, aside the fact that people overbuy, we overbuy things that we do not need, there is also the issue of businesses not being able to sell out, what they have produced. And because they don't want to give it out on discount, they don't want to give it out free of charge, they just throw it away into the bin, and then it ends up in our landfill causing more problems for us. So I really love the approach and how you're able to work with, your clients in the way that you do. So walk me through your journey in the fashion industry, like when you eventually, started doing this thing. So what was the progression like for you?
Well, I when I yeah, so I was when I was doing this degree, it was like 4 years. So I started working with a product development company. She's like one of my mentors. I think she taught me so much, and that I think is important as well for any startup that get yourself people and learn from people. Like that's the best way to learn. So I did those at the same time. So I got like the influencers from the university of the creativeness, and then I got like the more practical, real industry experience of how you measure a top, how you make a pattern, like more exact industry experience from working. And whilst I was doing that, that's where the real dream came in. So whilst I was still doing my degree, I think it was just at the end, or if it was just after, uh, I decided that I was going to try and have my own brand because that was like the big dream. And when you're in also fashion university, like that, like everyone's kind of, I think, end goal, it becomes very much like hyped and like something glamorous that we all want to do. So I did start my own women's wear label, which had a sustainable angle, but in those days, it was it wasn't as well. I mean, I think from my side, it wasn't as well thought through. That's something with, like I'm talking about today. But I did think that it would, like, it should have factories that worked with people who had minimum wages at least, and like were taken care of, not going too far abroad where I couldn't control it, and I wanted to use as much sustainable fabric as I could. Uh, and I ran that whilst I was working my way through different companies in the fashion industry. So I was doing it kind of part time for 5 to 6 years more. I think yeah, around 5 years. Uh, and then when I decided to stop that and also have a baby, so I had my first baby, and then after that, since then that's where I started working more for myself and started designing and doing product development for others. And then the longer I've been doing that, so I've been doing that for about, my son is now 12, about 11 years. Uh, um, the more I've been doing it, the more I've been getting into startups and work. It's like a passion of mine. I really want to see them succeed. And I've realized from having my own fashion brand how many mistakes I made and how many mistakes you can make. So it's been a little bit of a journey, like learning what is the best way and how to actually approach it and what to think about. But it comes from having my own brand, and also like more and more gradually working more and more with startups and realizing that I have so much that I can teach them so that they become a fit.
So if I want to start my own fashion brand, where would I begin? With you by my side.
Yes, I mean, I would say that where you would begin, where everyone has to begin, and we've already said that, is to look at your customer. So I would work with you to look at your customer first and really narrow down what is your brand and where do you, what is it you want to do with your brand? Because it's easy to say, I want to be a sustainable brand, but okay, do you want to help make sure that all the workers in the factories are good? What laws are you looking at? I mean, there's so many things within just production, within other parts of your business. So, like, narrow down which are the most important ones. I then obviously help with coming up with the idea and the design so that you have a product to sell. But yes, if you want to take it further and you need help, many people often say, "Oh no, I have a marketing background, or I have a sales background. I know what I'm doing." But they don't always, because what you learn maybe in a degree, or if you work in a completely different industry, might not always match passion. But yeah, I am happy to share my knowledge and work with people so that they set up the different strategies into sales. There's different channels of sales you can go down. Like one we talked about was the pre-sale, for example, start selling early, and then selling to boutiques is one strategy. But you need to then know how to do that and what is important in that journey. And then you have straight to customer. There's quite a lot of things in there. I do help brands with that too.
While you were talking, you mentioned the factory. That's with respect to being sustainable, and you said you would also help the client to know, to find out if, when they say they want to be sustainable, is it that they want to ensure that, the factory workers, the people who are going to be making these clothes, are well paid and are well taken care of. So I really want us to shine more light on that aspect, the factory workers. So are you trying to say that your client, those that take this into consideration, that they could, I don't even know like how to put the question. So how would they contribute to the well being of the factory workers?
Uh, that's obviously what you need to first also then think about what country you're going to develop your product in. And then once you're looking at the factories, there are different ways to find this out. There are third party um, companies that can go in and they do audits. So they go in and they speak to the different workers about their environment. They go in and they check the environment, and they have lists of different things that you need to meet to actually get approved, or you get different grading. Uh, and one thing I would say to anyone, like like most factories would have this done themselves, or maybe they've had another client, but usually they have this. So even at your first initial stage of contacting a factory, this is one thing that I would ask. Like, have you been audited? Can you send me that report? I mean, I would all recommend, if you have the means, which is not always possible when you're a startup. So there has to be some kind of trust sometimes, but obviously go visit the factory as soon as you can. Sometimes when you start up, you don't have that fund, but then ask for your audit report. You can look at, there's so many different sustainability certifications in the industry. I have a PDF which I know you're going to put in the podcast. Where you can see different. I mean, some are for fabrics, some are for all the chemicals being used, and some are for how workers have it. So you can ask what certifications they have, and obviously the highest one when it comes to the workers is usually a fair trade mark. Uh, what we need to bear in mind, though, which I think this is like important when you're starting a sustainable business, is to start with the communication. Communicate and get to know your factory, because that's how you're going to find out. Because lots of factories as well, it's very expensive for them to maybe get these certifications. So if they're a smaller, say, family-run factory, even if they are following certain certifications and the standard, they might not be able to afford it. And if you're a small brand, you might not be able to sponsor them. But if you can sponsor them, to do the certification, that's an option. But it is very, very expensive. I heard one factory in India I was working with, and unfortunately, because none of the slightly bigger brands they were working with wanted to pay for their certification, and they couldn't afford it. They lost the certification, but obviously the factory was still working under exactly the same way and measures, so they were still really meeting the certification, but they couldn't prove it in that way. But then, yeah, send in an audit, and then you have to use your own judgment. But you can do a lot of due diligence and all.
Okay. So this really sheds a lot of light, on how the factories work, because what we've heard over time from reporters who cover what goes on in these factories, it's always as if the factory management is enslaving people. Now, I know that, yes, as a matter of fact, there are factories that do that, but there are also some other aspects, especially the aspect of challenges. Why can't these factories be sustainable? Why can't they, you know, be more fair with their employees? Why can't they show the accreditations, the certification for this thing that they say that they're doing? So it's also good that we understand the challenges, the obstacles that are standing in front of them, because at the end of the day, both the factories that make the dresses and the fashion brands and the models and everything, it's literally a chain that is tied together. So if anything that affects the other, if anything affects the factory and they are not able to operate properly, it affects the fashion designers, it affects the models, it affects the boutiques, it affects the retailers, even down to the customers. So I really love the fact that you also, shed some light on the challenges and the obstacles that the factories are facing. And it also a relief to know that, it's not as if you are the one who now has to go down and start trying to figure out, oh, is this factory good? Are they very sustainable? It's good to know that there is a body that does that, and there is a certification that they can show to prove it, and then you can also track what they are doing. So yeah, that really answers a lot of questions to the aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean they still do, and that's the hard part with the fashion industry. But I think one thing that I really think that everyone should think about is actually, as you say, is a chain. And some people say, oh, but it starts in the factory, they just want to make money and they sell it cheap so they can make big orders. Well, if the brands want things cheap so they can make the most profit, I mean, all companies need to make a certain profit to survive. But actually, I think it comes down to the customer as well. And that's where you, as a sustainable company, can teach you. I think it's up to you. You need to teach your customer, because there are still, which sometimes feels surprising, but there are still people in the normal customers in the world who don't understand why this t-shirt is so much cheaper than this t-shirt, because they think further. And then I think it's our job, like in the industry, like my job, but also like from brands, you need to educate them so they understand. It's like, I'm a small brand, I can't place 10,000 in orders, I can't get this sustainable fabric, I can't make sure that my workers have a good life if you want to buy the t-shirt for this cheap price. If you want to pay a little bit more, that's why my t-shirt is more, because I'm trying to do all of these steps within the industry. And I think we all need to do that. And I think it's about educating the customer, because as we said, we're designing for the end user. So the end user also, we can obviously affect the end user by teaching them. And I think as a sustainable brand, you can never be a cheap brand, because it's impossible in the supply chain to get everything cheap and still use the sustainable method. So what we have to do is angle ourselves a bit higher in cost, but also tell our customers, this is why I'm more expensive, but you're actually helping change the whole industry by buying my things, because the more we do that, and the more we, as a customer, demand to pay a bit more for something that is actually well made by people living at good standards, that's how we help. Obviously, it's hard, because sometimes it's hard if you don't have the money. But I also think sometimes people just like to have something Like, oh, I've got a bargain. It was great. I'm going to use this t-shirt for this party. But we shouldn't just buy a t-shirt for a party. And if we buy a t-shirt for one party and we buy it cheap, then that is completely, we can't say that we're shocked that there are children in camp making our clothes, because how are we otherwise going to pay something super cheap, maybe on the other side of the world?
Oops. So, since that way, the aspects of brands not being able to, I mean, the issue of minimum quantity in terms of,
Yeah.
ordering from factories, isn't it possible that you can have, okay, like have multiple brands ordering the same thing?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And this is the things that I actually advise all my small brands of when I work with them. Firstly, think of the minimum, and there are ways to lower minimum. Like you say, you could collaborate with other brands that want to use the same fabric. I think that's a splendid idea. You can also ask factories, because a lot of factories have, say, leftover fabrics from another brand or another production. And then maybe you can't get exactly your color, but maybe you get another shade of blue. So I always recommend, like, ask what stock fabrics they had, and if they have stock fabrics, could you get lower minimum? It's a negotiation, and that's why, like with anything, like having relationships and working on those, that makes it more possible. But definitely, I think work together with other brands. I think as a culture, the fashion industry has been a bit closed off. You don't want to share your factory. You don't want to share, and because you're scared that someone will take your production slot and all these things. But I think the world is changing, and I'm working my best at changing it with this, because I really think that the more we work together, like, you could approach another brand. That's perfect. Like, if you're both using a very common fabric and you're using a similar shade, why not just use the same shade and go together and lower the minimums? And the factories are usually more than happy to help when you do these kind of things. They might have to meet their minimums because they have staff costs and factory costs and everything, but they're happy to negotiate on minimums if you come up with good ideas and ways to do it. And I think that is one. Stock fabric is one. Also, as a design brand, think a little bit, where can you reuse your fabric within your collection? And that's one thing I do a lot, is to look at, okay, can we use the same color, or can we use the same fabric, but we just dye that fabric in two colors? So at least, like, we're meeting minimums for fabrics, we're meeting minimums in some of the areas and in some of the lines, so that at least we can then ask the factory to maybe just make less of each item, but it's the same fabric. There's many ways, and I think that's the key to changing the chain. That if we all start doing all of these different small clever ideas, it will become more of a mainstream. It's still not mainstream, but it's happening. If you start talking and creating relationship, people are much more willing to say, "Oh, I've got this lovely fabric. Maybe that works for your collection, and you can just get a small quantity."
Okay. That really explains a lot. Now, on the other hand, talking about customers, the end users, not really understanding why some outfits are cheap and why some are expensive. I know for sure that sometimes the issue of what is expensive and what is cheap is it's very very confusing and relative, because the same customer who is going to tell you that your t-shirt is expensive, the next weekend they're going to buy from the big brands that are way more expensive than yours, and they would happily pay with all of their minds, and they would say, yeah, I'm so proud of this thing that I bought, but they wouldn't buy the t-shirt that is less expensive than that. They would call the t-shirt expensive. So um I don't know if the issue is just people not understanding what's expensive, why something is expensive, and why something is cheap. I think for some individuals, for some customers, it's more like they love to wear things that are aspirational. So what I have observed with some sustainable fashion brands is they tend to stick to like headstones most of the times. They're just very kind of darker shades of colors, and then even the way they sew the dresses, it tends to not really fit to the body. It tends to not have glitters. But being sustainable doesn't mean that one doesn't want to shine. We still want the glitter and glamour. But we want it without hurting the planet. So I think that's also part of the reason why some sustainable fashion brands are unable to sell out their clothing.
I agree, and I think there are more and more options. That's what I think. That's definitely, as a brand, you need to work on that. If that's what your end user wants, like work with what we have and see what you can add. And also, I think since we're in a world of progress, like we are not sustainable anywhere completely within fashion, and everyone knows that. So maybe just taking smaller steps, one step at a time, we will get more and more things. So if you, for example, want to make something more glamorous and glitzy, maybe you do use a sequin that maybe isn't sustainable, but everything else is sustainable and the way it's produced is sustainable. Maybe that is a good enough step for now. But like nowadays, there are sequins that are now made of recycled plastic and things. So we're getting, I mean, recycled plastic is still recycled plastic. It's not amazing because it's still plastic in the first place, but we're taking more and more steps. And I think look into those kind of things. There are more glitz and glamour, and maybe the color you dye to is not 100% natural. Maybe you use some chemicals in that, but then just make sure that those chemicals are within the legal advice, because some chemicals are allowed to be used because we can control them and we can clean them up better. So, and that list changes constantly, and more are taken off. But like they're still, and these big companies need to follow this too. But so I agree with you. It's taking small steps and doing the best you can, but you have to be aspirational. But when it comes to the fit, and I think that is so fascinating because that's something that really relates to smaller brands, how it fits on your body. When people start a fashion brand, they don't realize the process of the production, and that's where that happens. I think that it's not perfect because in production, I mean, if you look at a big company, so many different departments working with so many different areas of just the production, and then you have the other areas of sales and marketing. And just because you can define something pretty and maybe make a pattern doesn't mean that it fits well, right? So with anyone I work with, we most likely have 3 samples coming from the factory. And we look at the pattern pieces and all the measurements, and we change it according to what makes the best fit. And I think for me, that is a part that I'm very passionate about. I love a well-fitting garment. But nearly no one who starts out, especially if they don't come from fashion at all, you're coming from another area, you want to create a line, that part no one really knows about or realizes, and it takes time. And most brands I talk to, when I talk to them the first time, they say, "Oh, but I want my production in 2 months." If you want a well-fitting great garment, it does not take 2 months. It takes a lot longer because you need to send samples back and forth. You need to maybe make patterns, tweak patterns, and like every little detail, every little seam needs to be studied and needs to be taken into account how to best make it for the best fit, for the best not breakage, and all of this. And that is what obviously a big company can afford to do, and they have lots of employees just doing this, putting it on bodies, checking them inside out, going through everything. So I think that's where I come in that's what my business do. I want to educate the startup brands as well, that like to get the best garments to sell. And the more, like you say, if you have a great fit, it becomes more aspirational. You need to do that work as well. It's not just like, here's my design, send it off to a factory and you get something back, because that's not going to taste very nice.
But then What is it about you that makes you prefer or choose fashion brands instead of conventional fashion brands? Was it something you decided to do intentionally?
Uh, well, I've always, I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. So whatever I've been working, whether I've been working full time in a fashion brand or or part time when I ran my business, I've always kind of also worked on the side, like designing for startup brands, and it was so it kind of just grew. I think I always had an interest of building businesses. So for me, that kind of comes natural to want to help. But it came gradually. I mean, I've worked in big companies. But I've always had something on the side. So that's why I've always kind of worked with startups more or less during my whole career, because I started designing on the side for someone who wanted to do their own brand, or like it was just like a progress. But the more I've done it, and also with my own experience, the more I've grown in the industry, of course, the more I just realized that there's so much things I wish I would have known, and I had still been in the industry for a few years when I started my brand, and I had been an entrepreneur before, and I had fashion education. But I still, there's so many things that I wish that I would have known, and that I also noticed, like by starting to work with startups, that I know they're missing or not thinking about, and that's where the passion came in, and that obviously now after 20 years I have a lot of knowledge from different areas and working with different brands. So I just feel like I have so much to give. So it's like a passion now. For I want them to succeed, and I don't want to see people spend a lot of money on the wrong thing.
About your brand name, Lennerup.
Yes, that's my consulting. On my educational and more mentoring side, the company is called the Fashion Design Tribe.
Okay. So I want to start with the Lennerup.
Yeah.
I don't know, but when I look at the name, I'm tempted to say maybe what you're trying to convey is leaner up, like helping fashion brands to start lean and grow upward. Is that the idea behind it?
No, I love that. I'm gonna borrow that from you. Thank you very much. But no, it's actually my surname because I started out as more of a self-employed freelancer. So it's my surname, but I love that. I'm gonna use that. It's a brilliant idea.
Sorry, because I was the first place that I came across it was on the consultant side. So I was saying
Yeah.
Annette
Yeah,
Lennerup, and I was like, okay, does it mean Annette is helping fashion brands to start lean and then grow upwards, then they can expand? So I thought I should ask just to confirm.
No, it's my surname. It's because I've been doing it so long with my surname, and I had a lot of, like most times, especially before COVID, was word of mouth, and that it always just fell very naturally into the consulting side of the business. Uh, but I love that. That's gonna be included. Thank you.
A big thank you so much, Annette. I'm really grateful for
Yeah,
what
well,
you
thank
do.
you for all you're doing, and I'm looking forward to hearing all your episodes coming out. So let me know when it starts so I can listen in.
All right. Thank you so much, Annette. Well, this brings us to the end of the podcast. Even if, I mean, I think it's the most discouraging part having to say bye.
Yeah, I know. It's always like that.
Business for a Better World podcast is brought to you by the Portio Satori Limited. Our goal with Portio Satori is to make the world a better place through the promotion of businesses that impact lives positively. We develop strategies to enable good businesses to be profitable, transgenerational, dominant in their niche, and supported by their customers. Visit www.portiosatori.com to learn more.